Next, I'd like to talk with you about the animation workflow. There are a series of steps that come in a standard order that you perform to complete animation. That's actually why there are teams, because teams, or multiple people actually, on big projects, work as teams on each of the steps in the workflow. Or there might be an individual. But in this case, it's usually me, or in my case, it's usually me, and in your case, it's probably going to be the same until you learn that you're going to do all of these steps in the workflow. Now, let's take a look at what these steps are. Number one is the story outlining. Somebody's got to have a story or what's going to happen, a plot, characters, scenes, all of these things. And that's kind of, the writer-director kind of part, because they're also going to decide, how do the scenes fit together and all of this stuff. So they'll probably be heavily involved in production as well. Now, I'm not going to talk about all of that outside stuff. You're going to have to come up with your own story. I'm not going to tell you how. But I'm going to talk about steps 2 through 6. The first is illustration. You have to draw whatever your characters are going to be. And more specifically, you have to draw them as vector graphics rather than raster graphics, because vector graphics can be more easily and faster animated. Next, you're going to rig the characters. What this involves is setting bones that actually move points based on their movement. So you move the bones, the character moves. And Moho is smart enough to fill in all of the steps in between one placement of the bones and the next to make it a smooth animation. So rigging is the process of taking an illustration, a vector graphic illustration, and then binding bones to all of the points so that it moves and looks natural when it does. You'll also put in switches to have different eyes. You'll put in controls to blink. You'll also put in switches to have different hands and maybe hats and add facial hair or exclude it, and switches that control the mouth movements and the blinking of eyes and so on. All of this has to do with rigging. Now, when you get done with illustration and rigging, you have a finished character. And one of your options is to go into the Moho library and grab some finished characters. And then, knowing about illustration and rigging, you can go modify the illustration and rigging to make your own character from those. That'll save you a lot of work and get you a more precise character. Next, what you usually do is you record audio. And the reason that you do this before animating is that part of animation is lip syncing. So you've got to have the audio and you've got to have the characters react to what they're saying. Somewhere along the line, you're going to create scenes and backgrounds and props and all of that. So you've got to have supporting graphics as well. And then finally, you make it to the animation part, which is where you move the rigged characters around a scene, a backdrop with props, and have them interact with their environments, and multiple characters interact with one another. Now, I want to take a more detailed look at each of these steps after storytelling. When it comes to illustration, you actually have several choices. You can draw using analog drawing methods outside of a computer and then scan those drawings in. And then what I like to do is trace. So I'll either trace images that I've gotten off the internet or drawings done by my wife that are analog and scanned to turn them into vector graphics. Another is to just originate your drawing in Moho. You can also import SVG files from programs like Photoshop or Clip Studio Paint, or use the library resources. So there's a lot of ways to come up with illustrations. If you don't want to particularly illustrate, go ahead and use the library. If you're not very good at drawing, go ahead and trace. If you're great at all of them, then you're probably working in Photoshop and might want to import. If you're somewhere in the middle, you might want to draw in Moho. So you've got all the styles covered. Next is rigging, and that's adding bones to a character or an object. Remember that you can also have animated objects that do things, inanimate objects. You then bind the bones to the points and actions. So points would move the character around as you move the bones. Actions would maybe flip to a different hand position or a different mouth position. And then you may have to draw additional shapes as required. So if you're going to flip hands, you need to draw more than one hand position, and you may not do that until you're rigging. Next comes audio recording. Now here you have options. You could download free audio from the internet, so playing music in the background and so on is no problem. You can import your own recordings. As I'm doing here, I recommend using the product Audacity, which is free off the internet for doing recordings. And who knows, there may be time in this course that I can give you a little Audacity demonstration. You can also record within Moho, and we will definitely be looking at that, or use library resources, which includes little sounds that you can incorporate. Popping sounds, bangs, all the common sounds that you might want to incorporate. Now next comes scenes, backgrounds, and props. You can draw your own, and that's actually fun to do if you like that kind of thing. Or you can buy them or get them free off the internet, or use library resources once again to fill them in. So you've got your options here. And then finally comes animation. We all know about animation. That's the recording and the movement of the bones and so on, the actual creating of the cartoon. And you have to do this yourself. You can't load this from a library and so on. Well, actually, you can do to a certain extent. But this is where the artistry of animation comes together. So you have all of these options. Are you interested in the storytelling part? Are you interested in illustration? Because you can draw and take snapshots and make still images of your drawings. Are you interested in rigging? Maybe you just like to create characters through illustration and rigging. Well, specialize in that part. Maybe you really like the animation part of things, the moving of things, but you don't particularly like illustration or rigging. Well, in that case, use the library resources. No illustration and rigging so that you can modify the resources just slightly to make them your own, and then go ahead and spend most of your time with animation. So what I'd like you to do is prioritize your favorite animation, in the big sense, tasks. And prioritize them in order. What's the most important? What's the least important? And post your list when you get it to the Q&A section of this course. Or if that's too much work, just post your favorite. What are you primarily interested in? Is it the illustration and rigging, or just the animation itself, or the whole thing? Personally, I find the whole thing a blast, and it's nice having a variety of tasks. Now, this is a pause point, so I encourage you to pause the video right now and go do this task. Prioritize your tasks. You can rewind and see what the list was again and put together your priority order. I'd like to know, and you probably would like to know, what is it that you're so interested in that you're taking this course on 2D animation? And up next is going to be the course overview. I'm going to show you how this course is laid out and the little tricks that I've used in it and how you can take it. I'll see you in that lecture.